All right, Shalom. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. I'd like to give double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone who are let this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. And, I just want to do, a quick lesson on pretty much, the incident that took place in Washington, D.C. yesterday, where you had, three people, were shot, and two of them, were National Guard troops, you know, because, I seen it and immediately, jump right on it, and I shared it, with brothers because the White House, was on lockdown because of it, you know. So I'm not gonna play, the clip that I seen, just for fair use, just so YouTube doesn't try to take my video down, but I do have this article. So I'm just gonna go into it and then bring out a couple of scriptures. Like, well, in this lesson is edifying and straight to the point, and it's from CNN. It says Trump vows immigration crackdown after shootings of National Guard members in DC. It says it took only a few hours for President Donald Trump to turn what he called an act of evil and an act of terror into a full-blown argument for an even more intense crackdown on immigration. See, you see it. So it went from an act of evil to an act of this, you know. So again, here is, this guy, he's looking to blame us, again, and he's still, giving the Northern Kingdom hell, because keyword immigration, so he's still looking to, get you Northern Kingdom, up out of here. And eventually it's going to be Southern Kingdom as well, but right now he's putting hell on the Northern Kingdom, man. And then since this shooting happened, because right now they say that, those two troops that were shot, they're deceased, because right now, as we know or should know by now, not to take everything that they put on the news for a face value, because, 9 times out of 10, it may be lies, you know. Now, if this incident, is real and it wasn't staged, then again, this is more of a reason for number 47 to come down with great wrath. So it says his vow came as authorities held a man Trump described as an Afghan national over the shooting of two West Virginia National Guard reservists in Washington, D.C. They were in, excuse me, Slakia, they were in the Capitol as part of Trump's controversial deployment of troops to bolster law enforcement. So, yet again, now it wasn't a Jake that they blamed, but they said an Afghan national. So, again, now he's still coming up against, Ishmael, the so called Arabs, because you just had, last week, that guy Jake Lang, you know, come to Dearborn, Michigan to, protest against Ishmaelites, the so called Arabs. Now, again, we're not, defending them at all, you know, but at the same time, it's just, it's crazy, that, oh, well, you want them out of America, because they came over here, from whichever, country most of them came from, most of them probably, different parts of the Middle East, but right now, Dearborn, Michigan specifically is, the city where most of Arabs in America reside, you know, and people are upset about it, primarily who? Edomites. And not all of them, because again, you have Edomites that live in Dearborn, Michigan, but now you have, these different people coming up against them, you know, because it's that time where, racial tension is at an all-time high, and we're gonna see, you know, different nations come up against each other. So, like, yeah, let me do this right quick. We're gonna see different nations come up against each other, which the scripture is talking about, man. So we're gonna see race wars, we're gonna see class wars, nation against nation. So continuing, it says, America will never bend and never yield in the face of terror, and at the same time, we will not be deterred from the mission these service members were so nobly fulfilling, Trump said. The president, speaking on video from his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida, pivoted quickly from paying tribute to the victims of the tragedy to blaming the Biden administration for bringing the alleged shooter to the United States after the withdrawal of American troops in 2021. And then yet again, he's still pointing fingers at, Sleepy Joe. Says he claimed the incident underscores the single greatest national security threat facing our nation. So again, man, and just pointing fingers everywhere, man. When they themselves, the Nero administration, I'm just gonna say, he's allowing these, different immigrants to come into America as well. Just so you can do what? Kick them back out, or just have a reason to kick out random, people in America. So it says, but he also used the moment to drive home his campaign against other migrants and politically charged remarks that went far beyond Afghanistan at a moment when his administration is moving to re-interview some refugees admitted under President Joe Biden and revoking temporary protected status for those from several dangerous world hotspots. Trump lashed out at Somali immigrants in Minnesota, despite there being no apparent connection with the DC shooting. He claimed they were ripping off our country and ripping apart the once great state. Trump described Somalia as a country that has no laws, no water, no military, no nothing. This guy's an asshole, man. But again, he's just saying anything. But again, this is just, him being him. It says the full details of the incident in Washington are not yet known, but Trump's comments were characteristic of a president who rarely waits for full clarity before engaging politically, right? And we, some of this man's, or most of this man's speeches, are written anyway, but, this is his, you know, remark on the incident, which, I'm not going to read this whole article, and I'll leave this in the description box as well, but it's crazy, man. It says, but there will certainly be urgent questions about the vetting of Afghan immigrants, many of whom came to the U.S. during the Biden administration after helping American forces during the country's longest war. While the exact circumstances of Wednesday's incident are not fully known, the FBI has long warned about the danger of self radicalization individuals from my immigrant communities becoming inspired by groups such as ISIS or propaganda or carrying out attacks on the US homeland. So right, this honestly is a good thing because, with this particular incident happening, this is giving, number 47 more of a reason to come down with great wrath, you know, which is what I'm going to start with in the book of Revelation, chapter 12 and verse 12. And then Salakia, I just woke up not too long ago, I had a long night at work. This is the book of Revelation, chapter 12 and verse 12. It says, therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea. For the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And right, man, you know, this incident could very well lead up to, all hell breaking loose. And I'm not saying it's fact. I'm just saying this could, speaking as a man, because again, two National Guard troops were, killed. So this could very well be the fuel that he needed to come down against, people of color, but primarily who, the Israelites, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, and today is so-called Thanksgiving, so hell, man, we'll see what happens. We just got, 1 month left in 2025, and then, we'll see how 2026 plays out. But every month of this year, man, it has been something, you know, something major always happens. And this, this isn't a light thing. We'll see how long, they play, you know, with it in the news, how long they keep it in the news. But, we'll see until, the next thing happens. Because again, something else major is going to happen to where it's going to cause this man to lock down the country yet again, you know. And this time, when he locks the country down, just like he did 5 years ago during the, pandemic, you know, is going to be the real thing, because what most of everybody, complied, they stayed in the house, you know, but now there's actually going to be curfews. There's actually going to be troops out on the street, and if you're not outside for a valid reason, let's just say, if you don't have a job, just like they were saying, in 2020, if you don't have an essential job, you can't be outside. You have to stay in the house, after a certain time, you'll be hauled off, to a concentration camp, you know, and this is the world we live in today, where we're about to see these particular things take place, right? So I'm going to jump to the book of Second Ezra, chapter 15, and I just start from 14, and it says, woe to the world and them that dwell therein, for the sword and their destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands. And right, man, this is what we're about to see. We're already seeing, different nations come up against each other. Primarily Esau, you know, he's forever going to come up against us as long as he's in power, you know. But you're seeing what? He's also coming up against, Ishmael, the Arabs. He's coming up against them, antagonizing them, you know. So what, I was watching, the brother Malak's video yesterday, and just like he featured a video where a woman, from Britain, she was going into, the true history of how Britain, you know, recovered after World War II, because again, a lot of Edomite men died during World War II. So what? A lot of so-called black men, primarily Benjamin, so-called Jamaicans, Levi, the Haitians, and even, Judah, so-called Negroes, went to the UK to help rebuild. And that's why, a lot of, Negroes are over there. That's why they have, the British accent, British, it's like, yeah, kind of a tongue twister, British accents, just like our Apostle Gabar talks about all the time, he was, he lived over there, you know, because again, a lot of Benjaminites do reside in the UK, and just like he says, his people are from, St. Lucia, one of the islands, in Jamaica, because again, that's one of the islands where a lot of our people migrated, you know, after World War II, you know. And I say all that to say that, again, he wants these different migrants out. But what about you, Esau? Today is so called Thanksgiving. You migrated, you know, from Spain, or, Christopher Columbus, Cristobal Colon, he migrated from Spain, first landing in Hispaniola, which today is known as, the Dominican Republic and Haiti, which is the same island. It just split. You have the Haitians on one side, which is the tribe of Levi, and then the Dominicans on the other side, which are the tribe of Simeon, which prophecy is spoken of those two tribes, in the book of Genesis 49, which I'm just going to quote. And it says, Simeon and Levi, instruments of cruelty, shall be in their habitation, because I seen a documentary you know, like a few years ago, I want to say in like 2018, something like that. And it was describing how, Simeon hates Levi, you know, and then vice versa, because if either tribe is found on the opposite side of their island, like if a so-called Haitian is found on the Dominican Republic side, then they'll kill him, you know, and then vice versa. If the Dominican is found, you know, on the Haiti side of Hispaniola, which again is the same island, it's just split, between those two tribes, then what they'll do the same thing, you know. And the instruments of cruelty is talking about, both tribes, will be into witchcraft, which, Levi, they're the priests. So of course they have that connection, with the Heavenly Father, but now, it's on the left hand side, you know. So Levi practices voodoo and Simeon, they practice brujeria. Brujeria, I'm trying to say it correctly. In which I seen a video, of a group of people, it was mainly women, getting arrested for practicing witchcraft, which, Lord willing, I'll do a video on that, just showing you that verse in Genesis, speaking of that, man, But I'm just going to come back real quick before I finish in that second address. I'm going to get Matthew chapter 24. And the point is verse 7, but I'm going to start at 6. This is Matthew chapter 24 and verse 6. And it says, Ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And right, we're still hearing of wars, rumors of wars, World War III is still looming, And even though we're waiting for that great and terrible day, to come upon this place, Babylon the Great, we still have to wait for, the time of Jacob's trouble, to be fulfilled. And Revelation 13, verse 16 to 18, the mass implementation of the mark of the beast, which is the RFID microchip. We're still waiting for these, last two major prophecies to take place before that great destruction, and excuse me, Salakia, and simultaneously, the second coming of our Lord Yahweh Shai, these things have to happen. Verse 7, it says, For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. And right, man, we're seeing that. And again, the main point I want to make is what? Nation against nation. We're seeing that Esau is coming up against us. He's always going to do that as long as he has the ability to. This is why, again, he's going to get his last hoorah. The Lord is going to allow him to have his way one last time before he takes him out of power. So what? He's going to antagonize primarily Israel. When I say Israel, I mean all 12 tribes, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. He's forever going to antagonize us. Now what? He's also coming up against Ishmael, because we remember what happened on September 11th, 2001. We remember, even though that's the one thing, never forget, right? Even though we know it was a, inside, job, we know, when I knew this, when I was in high school, man, it's crazy. Before I came into the truth, like, we know, man. But now Esau, he's getting sloppy, with the particular things that he does, right? Also, before I come back to, that second address, I'm going to get this real quick. In the book of Second Peter, no, Slakia, not Second Peter, Second Corinthians 2 and 11, and it says, "Lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices." So, right, just like I made mention of, if this isn't a false a false flag attack, just to get the people stirred up, just so this man can have a reason to be ready to crack down on immigration, quote unquote immigration, then it really happened? And then we already know, man, because it's still, never 100%, but they're saying, an Afghan, immigrant carried out, taking out those two troops. But we'll see. But just remember, we're not ignorant of his devices. So, Ishmael, you thought you were good in America too. No, because again, you clearly see from the protests that took place last week in Dearborn, Michigan, that they don't want you here. If they don't want us here, what the hell makes you think they want you here? You know, so come on, man. You ain't no better than us. So coming back to 2nd Esdras chapter 15, it says, "For the sword in their destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands." And right, man, this was well on the way. It's looming. You know, a civil war is going to break out. You know, class wars are going to break out. It's inevitable, man. Because right now, what everybody, you know, damn near everybody in America is struggling right now. Obviously, if you're rich, you know, if you have a certain amount of money to where you're not really affected by, you know, the inflation that is taking place, the high food prices, gas, the different basic necessities that we need in this place, then obviously, you know, you're good. But for the most Americans are struggling. And if everybody's struggling, then what, man? Everybody's on edge, so everybody is ready to crash out, at any moment, because of the hardship that they're suffering here in America, man. And we're feeling it too, you know. It's hard, but what? We depend on the Lord, unlike these people out here, man. In verse 16, it says, "For there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power." And right, man, again, people, once all hell fully breaks loose, people are going to take up arms to come up against each other, man. Remember, Esau, he is waiting for this, man. He salivates over this, just being able to hit the streets and primarily take, Israelites out. But again, anybody that's, like the brothers say, that's darker than a brown paper bag, man, he's going to take you out, man. And this is just the reality of the world we live in today, man. The wicked runs the world, so what? He's going to do his job by fulfilling being the wicked, you know. And what, just like it says, they should not regard their kings nor princes. So these people, they're not going to regard what these different, politicians or people of authority have to say. They're not going to care what the mayor, the governor, the senators, these different people in Congress, or even the president himself. People are going to take matters into their own hands, because of the things that are going on, right? And so I'm about to say number 17, but verse 17, which is the main point, because again, if this particular incident was true and it's not a false flag attack, then again, it's going to give number 47 a reason to do this. 2nd Esdras 15 and 17, it says, "A man shall desire to go into a city and shall not be able," which is what? Martial law. So again, instead of, National Guard troops only being in certain cities like DC, Chicago, Memphis, they're going to be all over US in every major city, in every state, you know. This is the reality of it, man. So things are going to get more and more turned up, and this is what we're hoping for, that 2026 gets turned up, that the Lord turns this place up, man. Because again, this day to day, waking up early, yes, I myself, have the day off today, because of so called Thanksgiving, which I'm going to go into that, you know, but it just takes a toll on you, man. I'm sick of this place. And just like I say when I do my Madison Modern Day Silent videos, man, like if you're not vexed by this place, man, by these people, just this overall American lifestyle here, man, then you're a part of the problem, you know, Because again, it's like us knowing this truth. We're just ready, to get out of here. This the spirit that we're in. We're hastening the day that we may be loosed, out of this prison. You know, so we just pray that the Lord speeds this thing up, man, and that we are indeed a part of the elect to receive salvation, because we're gonna need it in the times that we're about to enter into. So when you get these last couple of verses, 2 Corinthians 15 and 18, it says, "For because of their pride, the city shall be troubled, the houses shall be destroyed, and men shall be afraid. A man shall have no pity upon his neighbor, but shall destroy their houses with the sword, and spoil their goods, because of the lack of bread and for great tribulation." And right, man, the famine is still looming, right? And then the food prices continue to, skyrocket and increase, because I've been seeing this myself when I go to the grocery store. Something may have been, how to say, like, for instance, this body wash, that I usually get, it was $6.99. You know, now it's like damn near, if not like $8. You know, so again, like it's wise for us to pay attention to these things, because inflation is taking place, man. So with the cost of everything going up, then especially if, number 47 finally strips away, the government assistance, the food stamps, the WIC, the Section 8, all of it, then what? People are going to lose it, you know, because you're seeing people are panicking. Right before November 1st, you had women talking about, oh, well, they're going to be out here selling it, you know, as if some of the same ones saying, if they lose their food stamp, as if some of y'all ain't doing that already, you know. You even had guys, oh, well, I'm going to the grocery store and stealing this and that. Y'all don't realize that a grocery store only has about 3 days worth of food in it. So if you steal the food that's in there, there's not going to be a truck to bring more food for you to steal, you know, because if there are no workers in the fields bringing in, the harvest, which usually Issachar does, the so-called Mexicans, guess what? No food is being brought in, and that's what's happening. Issachar is scared to go to work because they don't want to be deported or hauled off to a concentration camp, you know. So it's the perfect recipe for disaster, to starve you people out and make things more difficult. And again, we're here, so we're gonna feel the effects of this thing too. Don't think we won't, because we will. But at the same time, unlike you people, we depend on the Lord. You know. So I'm going to end it with this. This book of Second Esdras, chapter 16 and verse 71. It says, "They shall be like madmen, sparing none, but still spoiling and destroying those that fear the Lord." And right, man, if this particular situation, again, if it's true and not a false flag attack, then it may escalate, and then, number 47 very well may do that, may send troops to every major city because of this situation, to crack down on quote unquote immigration, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if Michigan is the next place he sends troops to. Why? Because again, of the protest that took place, with this guy Jake Lang, which he's a small hat too, and you could tell, because just like brother said, if you look at him from the side, you can see his nose, man. Because one thing Amalek cannot hide is that big nose that they have, you know. But he's gonna send his troops out, and once he sends them out, man, shit, it's game time. You're not gonna have regard for young or old. They're gonna carry out whatever particular orders they have, you know. So, Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. I like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who I let this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. Till next time I say, Shalom.